Hello, everybody. My name is Professor Jason Powell. Today, I'm going to give a public lecture on how to publish in academic journals from the editor's perspective. I'm a professor. I have 25 years experience of editing journals, top-ranked journals, and I'm currently the editor-in-chief of the Sage Publisher journal, Illness, Crisis and Loss. I'm also the associate editor of the world-leading The Canadian Journal of Sociology. I've also sat on a number of editorial boards in my lifetime, 120, and I'm also very much a sort of a published scholar myself. I have 460 publications, as well as approximately 75 academic books published as well. So today is very much about sort of giving back to you some tips with regard to how to publish and think about why to publish, what to publish, where to publish. And equally, in terms of when we're focusing upon journals, how to focus upon addressing particular forms of feedback once one's submitted to a journal, and reflecting upon that and learning from that process. Please remember, I've had more rejections from journals than I've had acceptances. So one has to persevere, and at the same time, one has to sort of have the tenacity to keep continuing and learning from the process of feedback. Why publish for you? Well, it could be about your passion for a particular topic. It could be based on economics, politics, international relations, sociology, criminology, criminal justice, health. Obviously, the COVID-19 virus is a point in time with regard to looking at issues to do with researching it, understanding it and its impact on different populations. And equally, this could be about focusing upon sharing your knowledge once you do publish to diverse different audiences. They can be academic, they can be communities, they can be local, national, global. It's important to disseminate your research findings because that could inform policy, practice, or even influence other academics in terms of how they look at the world. Feedback's important in shaping your ideas as well. And you may have a particular topic that you want to explore and develop more in depth. So feedback and learning from others is essential. It could also be about achieving status and recognition. You could be working within a university, coming to the end of your PhD, or a scholar who wishes to sort of persist in the context of wanting to publish more widely. But the important point is it's about achieving status also and recognition in your field of expertise. The latest advancements in terms of research methodologies, theories, for example's sake, are also important with regard to why you need to publish. And that's an important part of that process. And equally, and perhaps most importantly, is also about not just publishing on your own, but learning and publishing with others, the importance of collaboration. And I can't emphasize how important that is in the development. Many, many years ago, in terms of my first publication, was a collaborative affair where I learned from professors that helped build me as a professor. And my particular ways and means of understanding how to publish articles. Now, what type of publishing or what type of areas? Well, there could be empirical research, could be quantitative analysis, qualitative research studies where you've gone out and asked questions face to face or through difficulty at the moment with the coronavirus, but asking interviews, participants' observation, but through quantitative methods, Obviously, that could be through statistical packages in social science, regression analysis. So obviously, there are different ways and means in terms of trying to create originality in your research. The application extension of previous studies, you want to build upon it, or you may want to disagree with it. You've got something to say that highlights something completely original that stands out in the field. There could be theoretical pieces which are very undervalued in research, but in order to evaluate data, there has to be some way of trying to make sense of it. There could be literature reviews, systematic literature reviews, which are called state-of-the-art literature reviews, which tells us what the field is saying in its collective sense about a particular topic. And obviously there are also case studies where you focus in depth on one particular study, and that could be focused in terms of your locality or within your nation state, and you want to focus on that in depth, and people can learn important lessons from that. Equally, in terms of journals, in particular, book reviews. For those who've never published before, book reviews are a good way in terms of getting your name known. Being proactive is an important part of that. Offering your services to editors of different journals to say that you want to be a book review editor, or book reviewer is a really, really important issue in terms of showing your enthusiasm to journals and getting your name known widely. Rather than waiting for it to happen, you're making it happen. How to publish. Do I have a story to tell? Is it convincing? Is it finished? Is it incomplete? Is it a pilot study, or is it a finished study? Is there an audience for my work? Is it academic? Is it communities? Is it policymakers? Find out who's going to be of relevance to that particular study. And learn from others is so important. Discussing your ideas with other colleagues, your friends, students, professors are really, really important in the context of how you want to plan a publication. If you've never written one before, always perhaps try and speak to somebody who has, or a mentor. That's really important, because obviously people who've got rich experience in the field have invaluable insights that you can draw from. Write your manuscript on your own, and I can't emphasize the importance of collaboration, where you can gel or articulate your ideas with other people and learn from each other in the collaboration pieces that you can write in terms of a potential publication. And select a journal with the right fit. If you're writing an article on economics, there's no point submitting it to a journal on sociology. Or if you're writing an article on criminology, there is no point publishing it in a journal on econometrics, because obviously it has to be relevant and fit the mission aims of what the journal is about. So I was always advised to check what the journal advises people who wish to submit an article is about. And equally, know the players or know the editors, get to know them, find out about them, do searches, find the editorial board, really key. Especially that those people on the editorial board will be most likely in the first degree invited to evaluate your particular paper that you may submit to a journal. So if their topic is very similar to yours, the likelihood is they will be chosen. If they are busy, the editor will choose then an anonymous reviewer from somewhere that could be anywhere in the world. And at that point, it does become unknown. But as a tip, always check the editorial board first. Never worry about rejection. focus on the following in terms of my tips as a Sage Publications editor. 1. Focus on the structure, that it's got the classic beginning, middle and an end of an article. 2. One of the issues about the reason of rejection is that perhaps sometimes there's lack of context or content. And if there's just research findings talked about, then the likelihood is reviewers or editors will look at that and ask the question, where's the literature review? So there has to be a literature review. There has to be some form of, as it were, research methodology, research findings, a discussion and a conclusion, and a set of references as well. It also needs to be for a specific audience, especially if it's a global journal that you have chosen. And therefore you have to be very sensitive in terms of realizing that different people from different countries will be reading that particular article. So it has to be written in a way that if you're focusing upon a global audience, then it has to be written so that everyone can understand it globally. That's a very difficult trick and comes with experience. And that's why I talk about the importance of collaboration. Not citing reviewers' works. This should never be seen as a rejection for an academic journal, but it does happen sometimes. I, as a responsible editor-in-chief of a Sage Publications journal, ignore reviewers who state they have not cited my work. That may sound quite peculiar, but this does happen. So know the field and highlight the key studies in the field and the key authors if you're talking about a particular topic. Not too many authors also take the opportunity to revise an article or to resubmit it because they think, well, there's no point, or I may as well as leave it for now. No, take the opportunity. Many journal editors get frustrated that authors, if they follow the feedback correctly, then they can enhance and improve their piece of work so that once they resubmit or revise the paper, it could get published. So perseverance and determination are essential values with regard to focusing upon publishing in articles in particular, or books and book chapters as well. Now, a key question is that if someone asked you, or one of your friends asked you very quickly to explain a paper that you have written, could you do so in everyday, clear language? Without talking about regression analysis, without talking about deep quantitative analysis or qualitative analysis, but in a language and a way and means by which anyone can understand. So keeping things simple is an important part of publishing from an editor's perspective. Obviously, it has to be referenced throughout the paper, but equally being able to explain it in a convincing way, but to anybody, is an important part of learning how to communicate your message of what you have published. The clear argument should always appear in the abstract, and this is very important in terms of your paper, because this captures the attention of the reviewer and of editors in particular. And equally, in the first line of your paper the question is, why now? Why this research? Why this topic? Why is it so important? If it's hidden 17 pages later in a paper, what your paper is about, then the reviewer by then may have lost interest. So you want to capture the reviewer straight from the off and state to them the importance of this argument and why the research findings need to be disseminated, or the topic to be understood. Make sure your argument runs all the way through different sections of a particular article. Introduction, background, or literature review. Some people may have a theoretical or analytical framework. Others go for research methodology, research findings, discussion, conclusion, bibliography, or set of references, pending the style of the journal. Very, very important to remember that structure. So it's got that classic line running through from the beginning of the article to the end in terms of coherence, clarity, and communication. But structure and organization and referencing throughout the article is essential for editors and reviewers so that they know that you've pulled rich scholarship together before you highlight your methodology and findings and tie them together. From an editor's perspective, one of the main problems of articles sometimes is that journal editors face is that some of the papers are badly written, and therefore sometimes writers, researchers, even some professors have not gone that extra mile to get it proofread. It's really important for all research papers to be proofread. For English, for different types of languages, that the grammar is correct, that the sentences and the paragraphs are coherent. It's really, really important. And therefore, I would always advise to get a professor or a colleague to read your paper as an independent critical friend, so that they themselves might be able to spot something that you may not have seen because you've been very absorbed writing the paper. And that happens for many experienced professors. I too write papers where, for example, say, I may have some errors. So I ask a particular colleague to read it, and then they say, Jason or Professor Powell, have you thought about this in this paragraph that you've written? And that's helpful feedback for me. So even professors develop. It never comes to an end. Lifelong learning is what it says. Lifelong learning, even in writing articles for journals and how to publish. It can be very hard to work out what's going on in an article in terms of someone's originality if it is poorly written. And that's why I really stress the importance of being proofread in terms of being perhaps edited by somebody else. And then if you're satisfied with that, then you're ready to submit it. And obviously without that, it does happen a lot. And it is also a major reason why people get papers rejected from journals. So be prepared is what I'm asking or advising in the context of my lecture, by asking colleagues to read your paper first in terms of proofreading, checking grammar, and maybe also checking that the references you cite in your paper are in your bibliography, and what's in your bibliography are in your article. Okay? So precision is important. Accuracy is important. Now, a very interesting issue from an editor's perspective. I try to get people who write, say, for example, from France or Canada or America or China, who assume everybody knows their particular, say, for example, health system or welfare system or treating older people system. And the same happens with UK writers. So being sensitive to an international journal, as I mentioned earlier, we need to include perhaps some comparative context at the beginning of an article of your topic in terms of not just how important it is, for example, say in China, but how important it is in other cultures or other countries, given that it may have a global readership, even if the case study focuses upon China. Now, crucially, somebody submits an article to a journal and can wait up to 3 months for feedback, and then the journal reviewers write back and state that this article is not suitable for this journal. So it's always important, and again to restate this, to focus upon looking at the scope of the journal that you're interested in writing for. This might sound obvious, but there are many submissions that are completely inappropriate for particular journals. And as I mentioned earlier, if someone's writing on physics, they should never submit it to a sociology journal because that audience wouldn't understand physics. And it's also not a good sign if you do not recognize any members of a particular editorial board. And ideally, look through some of the recent issues of a particular journal that you're interested in, that's of publishing articles on the same topic that are of similar quality and impact. And that means doing a search. Try and provide it as much up to date as you can. But if it's such a novel idea that you've got, try and sort of talk in depth on the studies that are very close to it but may differ from it. Okay? Make sure, again, from an editor's perspective, that it is clear where your research sits within the scholarly field. Which gap in knowledge is it addressing? Is there a problem in the field that's never been researched before? Or does existing research have a gap that's so huge that your ideas that you want to formulate into a plan to talk with others in terms of building that plan into a structure paper that can be mentored by someone, proofread by someone, that then can be submitted to an article. Your article then can be submitted to a journal. So it's important in terms of what I'm trying to pull together there. You may have an original idea, but you have to use other factors that I've talked about today in order to pull those ideas together. A common reason for articles being rejected is also about why the research is important. Why is it so significant? Without that, and if people dive in and just talk about the research, then the editor or the reviewers or from the editorial board won't know why this paper should be published. So be passionate about it in stating the importance of the topic and the findings and how it will impact either upon policymakers, academic analysis, for the public, for government, or even for the world population to understand, depending on what the topic is. Now, I talked earlier about the best way before you publish an article and be creating your ideas is also about you becoming a reviewer yourself. It's about being proactive, contacting journals and highlighting to those journals that you yourself have an interest in wanting to review for that journal. State to the editor in courteous manner that you have great respect for that journal and you would like to review journal articles for them. So in a sense, you get to see how they're written. Now, reviewer selection is very journal specific. Peer review is always a gold standard in the context of journals. You'll see that throughout. Authors who publish in that area or journal could also be asked to review papers. So there's a hint. Based on fields of expertise, which may match yours. Recommendations of peers who would like to or not to review your manuscript is also important. The reviews are always anonymous, so you'll never know who the reviewer is. And that's important because to have that anonymity gives credibility to the feedback that's given to the authors who've submitted to it, which is yourself. Why is this important? Well, it's important in terms of that anything that is submitted to a journal article and it's gone through peer review means that experts have given it a quality sign and seal of approval that this is of publishable standard, and therefore highlights that your work is important to the field. Now, as I mentioned earlier, doing peer reviewing is also important too. So you to become a reviewer, offering your services as a reviewer to journals is also important too before you write your article. So you can see how other authors have written their work and you can advise them too. So it's always a two-way process there. Okay? Now, it is always important in terms of one wants to focus upon a particular paper that what's assessed is the paper's quality, and this is important, relevance, importance, correct use of methods, concepts, literature. Is the not research original to the field? Does it have that authenticity to be seen, to be published? Is the research valid? And this does happen. Did the authors or the researchers over or under interpret data or results or research findings? Has there been an indication of any ethical approval that if someone's gone out and interviewed someone, have they had ethical approval by a university or an organization in order to interview that person? That's very important as well in terms of published papers and showing that you illustrate your understanding of that. And equally, once you submit it, listen to the feedback that you're given. One of the classic things that comes back is about the importance of referencing from the beginning to the end of an article. Never have gaps of where citations are not mentioned. Have them consistently through it. So when you get feedback from reviewers, the importance of highlighting how you've addressed their feedback if you need to revise your paper is absolutely essential and something I would encourage you to do strongly. Never be disheartened by feedback that's given because the reviewer may not even know you, the person. It's just the argument that they want to be convinced by. Now, peer reviewing is a process to get published in a journal. Now, sometimes a paper can be accepted with no revisions. That's very rare. Some of the world-leading authors, now, I can say I have possibly on Google Scholar, in terms of the concept of care, been the most cited researcher in the world. But even I struggle to get articles published with no revisions. Even I have to do some revisions, even as a professor. And that's very rare for it not to go through straight away. So please don't be disheartened if you're told you need to revise your paper. 99.9% of the time you are asked to. Except with minor revisions is also quite probable that some journals do that. Many don't. But if you get minor revisions, that's great. Just address the feedback. Subject to major revisions, well, that's important too, and mainly because that there may be particular gaps in literature review, methodology, or certain concepts don't make sense that need clarifying, that needs a little bit more work or research in order for it to get published. But never be disheartened by that. Remember, this is a process, and the more experience you get doing it, the better you become as a scholar and as a researcher. Today's PhD is tomorrow's professor. Never forget that. Dream big. Sometimes some papers or some articles are rejected prior to review. Some editors screen them. I do. And that's about relevance to the journal, which I have talked about on a couple of occasions. So I don't need to talk about that in more depth. But keeping it relevant to the journal is important. Rejection after review. Don't be disheartened. Take the feedback on board and submit it to a different journal. Sometimes when it's anonymous reviewers, you never know what their thoughts are. Some of those reviewers may have a particular viewpoint, others don't. And never be disheartened by rejection, because at the end of the day, whatever feedback that you get, learn from it, because it's a learning process. And as I suggested earlier, I've had more rejections than I've had acceptances in terms of papers. And obviously, feedback is a really important issue to develop the manuscript better. And it doesn't develop the manuscript better, just the manuscript better. It helps you become better as a scholar and as a researcher. So once you submit that paper, you may then go on to your next paper, and you've built that experience from 1, being a reviewer of a journal, 2, writing an article, 3, learning from the feedback, and number 4, you're on to the next one. And then you become more experienced. And then you may want to then bring other people on board, as we've talked about, in terms of collaboration. And then eventually, as you start to write more articles, you then become the mentor. Yeah? Now, what I would say, once someone's, given an opportunity to send the article back to the journal, whether it's through revisions, is always thank the editor politely. Okay? Be courteous, kind. That is always appreciated. Thank each reviewer for their feedback, even if you disagree. It goes a long way on getting them on your side, getting them on board. Show the humility for the opportunity to revise your paper. Don't just say, I disagree with your suggestions and therefore that's the end of it. No, always state, I kindly appreciate the feedback that you have given me, and I have attempted to address it in the following ways. If you do it in that way, that's respectful, and therefore reviewers may take more appreciation of that in the context of them maybe accepting your paper once they've gone through your revisions. So it's always about being professional and courteous throughout the whole process. Be concise to reviewers that you may have changed your manuscript in the feedback. So don't give them a long-winded explanation, but try and be concise. Maybe a number of points how you've addressed their feedback. Do not rush feedback. Take your time. Take a step back. Ask, what is the feedback asking of me? Is it structure? Is it organization? Concepts? Or is the research findings highlighted in a particular way that makes sense to a particular audience? Are the references that you've cited there accurate? And if those points have been highlighted in the feedback, simply just address them, but with courtesy. And obviously, highlight how their feedback has enhanced your argument. I cannot emphasize how important this is in terms of publishing. And it's essential because the reviewer then knows that you have taken their feedback on board. If you don't state that, the reviewer might think, well, all my hard work of reading your article has been for nothing. So show them that respect, show them that courtesy in terms of saying that their suggestions have been really helpful in the revisions that you've made to your article to a particular journal. Now, finally, in conclusion, and this is drawing upon 25 years experience of editing many, many journals globally. And it's a summary. 1, you may have an idea. 2, discuss it with someone. 3, write a plan. 4, start to maybe discuss or with a colleague or with a mentor how that plan can be put together in terms of an article. You may wish to collaborate with that mentor or colleague. 5th is to start drafting the paper, a draft. And that is about putting it into the house style of a particular journal or book chapter that's been asked for in terms of its style. But that's focusing upon a clear title. The title of the article makes sense. An abstract makes sense. Introduction. A very, very clear literature review, which should be state of the art, comparative, especially if it's for a global audience. Analytical framework. Some people might draw upon theories. Some people may not. That's fine. But research methodology. What research methods have you used? And that needs to be stated. Importantly, if you've collected data through that methodology, what are the findings? Illustrate them. Tables, for example, say graphs, diagrams, but in a clear and convincing way. Remember what I stated earlier. You really have to convince the reader of that article that the argument or the findings of your paper stand out in the field. And then you have a discussion section. And in that discussion section, you reflect upon the findings. How does it relate to other studies in the field? In other words. Then have a very clear conclusion, which may have some recommendations for further study. and appropriately always have a very, very clear set